Welcome back to the Career Profiles podcast. I'm your host, Sean, and this is part 3 of the Wilfredo Bazooka Gomez career profile. If you've listened to the first 2 parts, you will have heard about how he got himself into the sport of boxing, how he had an established and great amateur career, and how his professional career to date has been absolutely marvellous. However, we are now in part 3, and of course, stories will start to come out about the remaining parts of his career, notable moments, notable fights, and of course any other side stories from anybody else that was involved with Wilfredo Gomez at the time. Now, before I get into the story, as always, please make sure you've left us a comment, particularly on Spotify. Thank you so much to everybody so far that has been commenting, and thank you so much to everybody on YouTube who listens to the videos on YouTube and takes the time out to comment about the show and how they appreciate the show. So thank you for continuing to do that. If you have been commenting on Spotify and YouTube, greatly appreciated. If you haven't already left any ratings and reviews on Apple, please do so. The more reviews, the more ratings that we get, the higher the podcast goes up the algorithm and gets shown to more people. That's the aim of the game. We want as many people to hear these episodes as possible so that we can get that appreciation for the work that goes into it. So please make sure you do continue to do that because it is highly appreciated. A thank you has to go out, as always, to the patrons. Thank you so much for continuing to support us, and we hope you've been enjoying early access to these episodes. We've been dropping them about 5 or 6 days before they are due to be released, so thank you. Thank you for continuing to support us, and if you do want early access to these episodes, or you want additional content or ad-free on every episode that we do release on the network, you can check us out at patreon.com/BTR Boxing Podcast Network. Right, so let's get back to it then. Let's go back into Wilfredo Gomez's career. Now, we've left the career at the point where the big fight, the defining fight of his career with Salvador Sanchez is on the horizon. We've talked about how he's been adored in Puerto Rico and how he wants to continue to revel in the fame and notoriety that he's gained so far in his career. So we're going to head back again to June of 1981. Now, this is 2 months before the mega fight. The Puerto Rican journalist, who we've mentioned a few times in this episode, Chu Garcia, he presented 2 scenarios for Wilfredo Gomez. One where he faced Sanchez, and the other where Gomez faced Panama's Eusebio Pedrosa. Now, in response to which bout would be more difficult, Gomez said, "The bout with Pedrosa would be more difficult than the one with Salvador Sanchez. And this is my explanation," he said. "Pedrosa is more elusive than Sanchez. The Panamanian is much taller, measures 5'8" and boxes much more. As for the potency of the punches of one or the other in his punching power, I think Sanchez hits stronger, harder. However, I believe that the system, the speed in the fist of Pedrosa and the quantity of punches that he can throw per minute makes him more dangerous in that respect." So by June of 1981, Pedrosa had already defended his WBA featherweight title 11 times and had earned a controversial decision over Rocky Lockridge, a decisive knockout victory over Ruben Olivares, and was preparing for an eventual showdown with Juan Laporte in the near future. As explosive as that matchup would have been, Gomez may have been too close to the Panamanian boxing scene, meaning that there may have been some reluctance to make that bout. In the interview, Gomez also hinted at how exhausting it could be to fight in Pedrosa, a boxer who was aggressive and came at his opponent from so many different angles. However, the showdown was unlikely to ever occur. Panamanian leader Omar Torres pulled me and Pedrosa aside and made us promise to never face each other, said Gomez. Also, Gomez felt that financially, the Sanchez bout, well, it made more sense since Pedrosa was not as big as an attraction in the US. Gomez proactively looked ahead at beating Sanchez, unifying the titles with a victory over Pedrosa, and then jumping up to the featherweight division. His ultimate plan was to win the titles, make more money and then retire early, a strategy that of course so many boxers before him have wanted to employ, but failed to implement. Experts were not completely sold on Sanchez, as some of his performances lacked that seal of approval that is expected from great fighters. Legendary promoter Don Shaggin, who we've mentioned before, had helped develop the great Mexican fighters coming over to the Olympic Auditorium, where he became a mainstay for decades. A strong purveyor of talent, Shaggin saw something unique about Sanchez early on in the fighter's career. He said, "We were contacted about what a prospect this kid was. It was expected that he would become a world champion. All of these things later became true. At the Olympic, we brought up a lot of great Mexican fighters, and Sal was a great one. You could just see how he had an air about him. The special ones don't get too high or too low. I just remember how smart he was. As a young fighter, Sal would lay traps for other fighters. He would deliberately make mistakes to draw them in and then counter. He would drop his left hand just to get guys to lead. He would then take a step back and really punish them." Recalling the glory days of the 1970s, Don Shaggin had a ringside seat to some great wars and Mexican warriors of that time period. As great as Sanchez was, he was viewed a little differently than fans viewed the legendary and loquacious featherweight Ruben Olivares. Olivares was not only a vicious body puncher, but also a fan favourite for the way he interacted with everybody. Olivares loved being around people and making people feel comfortable. The Mexican fan base loved Sanchez, but in a different way. More importantly, Sanchez devoted himself completely to improving himself. Don Shaggin said, "Those days, the fighters did not watch films. Sal would watch them over and over again. I didn't know any other fighter that was doing that. He wanted to be a champion, better than any other fighter. No stone was left unturned. He corrected every mistake." As impressed as Shaggin and other boxing insiders were with Sanchez, he did not give the clear edge to Sanchez in the upcoming super fight with Gomez. One piece of evidence that did sway him in Sanchez's direction was that fighters had moments against Gomez, while Sanchez appeared to have control of his fights. Critics acknowledged that Gomez's 13 title defences were a testament to his longevity and resilience in a division that was by that point being showcased. Some still questioned the credibility of a host of challengers who posed little threat, but Gomez only had to beat the opponent placed in front of him. There was not one style that he did not acclimatise to along the way, Gomez. He faced guys that never backed off, guys that absorbed excessive punishment, guys who absorbed no punishment, guys who had nothing to lose, and those young, skilled fighters all took their best shot of the champion. He beat them all. Some he forced to quit, others had to be forced to surrender, and there were still others who tried their hand at brawling with Gomez. But none of it worked. The ploys, the varying styles, and even the hyper-focused training sessions, nothing. One of Gomez's former trainers said, "When he was at his best, Wilfredo was one of the best fighters ever. He could box, punch, and he didn't play games with you in the ring. He would knock you down and then hit you again. He always had that quality to be great. He was a complete fighter, and in his prime, he was one of the best ever." Everybody close to Gomez could attest to his Spartan training habits. If Gomez had exuded the charm and good looks of a Latin playboy, well, Salvador Sanchez, he revelled in the role of the dedicated boxer who always looked to get an edge on his opponents. A distance runner who earned the nickname Iron Lung, Salvador Sanchez was prepared to easily fight 15 rounds. When he was younger, Sanchez used to embrace running long distances. He especially liked to run up to 10 miles in the mountains and became accustomed to training in the unbearable conditions, which often included excessive heat. More importantly, Sanchez became a disciple of Guru Dr. Valenzuela's new wave approach of sparring 5-minute rounds and then bring his heart rate down during 45 seconds of rest. Sanchez's manager, Cristobal Rojas, perfectly stated Sanchez's approach when he said, "Discipline. That's his secret. Discipline in training and discipline in the ring. He doesn't go in and throw wild punches. He's not a street fighter. He studies his rival and then slowly destroys him." The key word was slow, because Sanchez was never in a hurry. If Gomez thrived on passionate bursts of energy, Sanchez benefited from slowing the fight down. Because he was in such good condition, Sanchez could afford to stalk his opponent from the opening to the final bell. Conversely, Gomez's camp was unravelling. Even the people closest to him couldn't reason with him on certain issues. There was never talk about him becoming arrogant or impossible to deal with, but Wilfredo was definitely detached from the man he was when he won his first title. On many occasions, Wilfredo regrets that he ever changed in this way. Through Gomez's eyes, Sanchez was just another challenger, and although he was a formidable one, Sanchez was not as dangerous a puncher as Carlos Zarate had been. Overlooking Sanchez was one of the few miscalculations for Wilfredo Gomez, who had recorded 32 knockouts in as many victories. Gomez had captured the world's attention at a weight class that rarely demanded attention outside the circle of boxing purists. The more compact 5'6" Gomez, whose staple moustache belied a baby face, was significantly shorter than Sanchez. His compact frame lacked the sharp, muscular tone of a fighter who demanded precision and perfection in training sessions, but the appearance didn't fool anyone. Gomez punched to hurt his opponent. Each offering was more dangerous than the previous one. Although most fighters of Gomez's stature struggled to obtain position on the inside against a taller fighter, that was actually Gomez's strength. When he did work his way on the inside, Gomez relied on accuracy and an innate skill to avoid any significant counters. What he did was fight in bursts, so ferociously that all 32 opponents succumbed to his attack. No fighter in the world could match Gomez in that category. Violence was his forte. Gomez didn't throw the volume of punches that Roberto Duran did, and he didn't possess the one-punch knockout power of Alexis Arguello. Nor was he as elusive as Wilfred Benitez, but he may have been the most tantalising to watch in 10-second vignettes. Similar to Duran, Arguello and Benitez, when Gomez walked into a fighting shape, he was nearly unbeatable. Also, people clamoured to be near him as he was both charismatic and polarising. But now he was moving up in weight to face Sanchez at 126 pounds, and Gomez felt that gave him an edge. It wasn't an ideal situation, but Gomez had faced adversity and conquered it many times before. Early on in the training camp, however, everything about the sport seemed distant to Wilfredo. He didn't love to train anymore. The discipline that used to reflect his training regime had now been replaced. But by what? It could have been a number of things that created a sense of unease. Whatever it was no longer the same Wilfredo Gomez. Chu Garcia, the journalist we've mentioned a few times, he said this about it. Wilfredo began to show signs of neglecting workouts when concentrated at the Holiday Inn Hotel in Ponce, the second largest city of Puerto Rico, a month and a half before the fight. It is important to remember that Gomez witnessed the bout of Sanchez with Nicky Perez in Texas, which the champion won without much effort, knowing that he was present. Wilfredo was beginning to disparage the quality of Salvador Sanchez, and he actually thought that it would be easy prey. Now, along with Chu Garcia, Puerto Rican journalist Angel Olivares also was confounded by what he was witnessing. He said, "I saw his training, and I saw the way he moved. It was a disaster. No way, Jose, but he had a big heart. His heart was bigger than Puerto Rico. He had the heart of a lion. He had very good sparring partners for that fight. They had experience, but Wilfredo was in command. There was no obedience to anybody. He was very responsible. It was Wilfredo and himself." Fighters preparing to face the great Salvador Sanchez recognised the danger. Sanchez lived at the gym, perfected his style, owning his physique and sharpening his mindset. Gomez had to be called back home from a cruise to begin training, and even then he didn't come right away. When his team reached Las Vegas, the real chaos ensued. Everyone associated with that time knew that something was clearly wrong. Gomez trusted Garcia to tell him the truth. Photos of the two men in Las Vegas prior to that fight reinforced the sense of camaraderie. But at the same time, Garcia was unwilling to soften the blow of what was happening to the fighter, and felt he had a responsibility to let the people know the truth, even if Gomez was unwilling to reveal it. He said, "I was with him 2 days after arriving in Las Vegas in Caesars Palace Hotel with photographer Gary Williams. Immediately, Wilfredo asked me to stay close to him because he needed someone outside his trainers to give him advice. I accepted his request on one condition: my work will continue to be objective like always. I never thought, however, that Carlos Castaneda El Nuevo Dia editor-in-chief would use my column that criticised him on the cover the day of the fight for being £4 over the limit of £126 hours before the weigh-in and needed sauna baths to make it. Deep down, Gomez knew he needed to get under Sanchez's skin, and he tried to plant that seed pretty early on. As was the case with common opponents, Nicky Perez's name surfaced again. Gomez sat ringside at Sanchez's bout with Perez on the 11th of July and gave this analysis to a reporter. I am 110% sure that I would knock out Sanchez within 10 rounds. After the decision was read in Perez's favour, the announcer quickly announced Gomez's name as he climbed through the ropes. What he and Salvador Sanchez exchanged were not pleasantries, as they backed off and then Sanchez called him back. Only a month before the bout, Sanchez was at his fighting weight. Gomez was not, and his cream-coloured suit hid his excess pounds. As evidence of his superiority, Gomez emphasised the fact that Sanchez could not knock out Perez, and he only needed 4 rounds to finish the job. Wilfredo was there, said Perez. He jumped into the ring as soon as the fight ended. He tried to box Sanchez right there and then. He was chasing Salvador. In response, Gomez said, "It was not a set-up. It was very serious. When I went into the ring, I told him I wanted the opportunity to fight with him, and I would take his head off." Despite remembering the histrionics to promote the fight, Perez had recalled the distinction between the two fighters, because he was the only fighter to ever face both men during that time period. Even though the odds were stacked 2-1 in Gomez's favour, Perez felt differently. He said, "I fought Gomez when I was 19 and I fought Salvador 2 years later. I thought Sanchez was going to beat him. He had so much stamina and conditioning. I remember seeing him in the last round and he was real fresh and real nice. It was unbelievable. I also remember seeing him fight Danny Lopez in Tucson, and he was fighting and throwing punches all night long, and in the final round, Sanchez looked like he was just starting the fight." Through accounts from newspaper reports at the time, Perez marvelled at Gomez's power and did give him a significant edge by saying, "Gomez hits harder, and I don't think Sanchez can stand it." 5 weeks prior to the big fight, both men were envisioning future title bouts. Gomez with Ruben Castillo and Sanchez with Alexis Arguello. In fact, Sanchez hinted at moving up 2 divisions to challenge Arguello for his WBC lightweight crown. Gomez continued to taunt Sanchez right up to fight night. Possibly trying to hide his own insecurities, Gomez aggressively went after Sanchez in the press. Of all the mistakes Gomez committed, infuriating Sanchez before the fight started was a risk that paid significant dividends in the past when he had trained properly and was facing a lesser opponent. Mauricio Sullivan, he recalled the time and he said, "That was Wilfredo's personality. He was always outspoken and intimidating. He felt invincible. Salvador was very calm and took it as huge motivation. He not only wanted to beat Wilfredo, but he also wanted to hurt him. Wilfredo just took the wrong approach. He was much too aggressive." Gomez's insults and provocations were not lost on Sanchez, who used them as motivation. Both fighters shared a severe dislike for the other, as the Mexican-Puerto Rican rivalry soared to new heights. Loyalist fans took sides as the Puerto Rican fans patriotically waved their flags while their Mexican counterparts readied their mariachi bands accordingly. Having been around the sport long enough, Sanchez knew the benefits of hyping a fight at all costs, but Gomez stepped over the line by challenging Sanchez's masculinity. Not as effusive or arrogant, Sanchez vowed to make the Puerto Rican pay for his transgressions. Not one to initiate a confrontation, Sanchez had a laid-back exterior where his playful nature often came out in interviews. The 2-1 odds were in Gomez's favour, as fight fans were not completely sold on Sanchez, who, even though he had avenged his 3 losses to that point in his career, wasn't as decorated a fighter as Gomez was. Former welterweight champion Carlos Palomino travelled there because he was commentating on the fight with Colonel Bob Sheridan, and he said, "I travelled to Puerto Rico with him. I stood between them and translated. Wilfredo definitely talked a lot of smack. It was my only time around Sanchez, and after the press conference, he was very upset. Wilfredo was saying stuff like Sanchez didn't belong in the ring with him and he would knock him out. Salvador was such a humble guy, and there was no fighting or anything like that with him. He was not the type of guy. He was irritated, but he told me, I will do my talking in the ring." I was flabbergasted by Wilfredo. It was such a huge fight, and Wilfredo was undefeated. The fans were taken aback by Wilfredo. They had a huge disliking for him. Each fighter eventually had his final say, and ironically, it was a quote from Sanchez that defied the bout. First, Gomez made a figurative beeline for his nemesis by saying, "I'm going to go after him," and that I would be like a hunter looking for a rabbit. Gomez predicted a knockout before the 10th round and added, "I'll hit him in his heart, his liver, his lungs and his pancreas." Sanchez, who had taken Gomez's boorish behaviour personally, he said, "I admire his record, but he's just another challenger, nothing more. Gomez better take a picture of himself, because after the fight, he won't recognise himself." When great fighters neglect some element of their training regime against world-class opponents, the result is often emphasised in their lack of speed in both hands and feet. Instead of cutting off the ring, they plod along and follow their opponents. Depending on the level of his opponent that evening, the fighter also feels a sense of urgency to end the fight quickly, or rely on one or two power punches because he can't accurately land combinations. A level of frustration sets in as the fighter then tries to reconcile the fact that as each round passes by, he becomes more and more incapable of accessing those worldly skills. That being said, deep down, Gomez knew he wasn't in a place physically or mentally to beat Sanchez. Too many things had left him distracted. He said, "I had a huge responsibility and couldn't keep feeling sorry, so I just decided to make something positive and tried to gain knowledge from that tragic event. I had lots of problems prior to the boxing match that a boxer shouldn't be dealing with, taking away concentration and focus on what really matters. These things make a great difference between winning or not." As usual, however, Gomez struggled with massive weight issues that were only compounded on such a grand stage. It was one thing to not make weight in a non-title scrap against Edin Nduku, but this was Sanchez in the biggest fight of his career. Sanchez was the reigning champion, Gomez said, so I had to go up in weight. I gained too much weight before the training, and then I had to come down. When a boxer fights at his weight, he has a lot of strength and good punching power. Sanchez had a lot of advantages. I was not powerful at that weight class. I still thought I could win easily. People in the WBC were involved in protecting Sanchez, and Suleiman was acting against my own best interests. Reports had Gomez near weight until an ill-advised dinner derailed any progress that had been made. Paco Valcarel recalled Gomez having to lose 4 pounds 2 days before the fight, and Gomez confirmed that he was 11 pounds over the week of the fight. Back then, the weigh-in was held the morning before the fight, so Gomez was cutting it way too close. Few, if any, fighters could have regained their strength from that type of weight loss so close to a fight. Again, Paco Valcarel said he was still overweight early Friday morning. He was trying his best to lose weight, but he lost no more weight. At 4:30 a.m, Wilfredo and I went running on the golf course. I remember I couldn't do it. I made 1 mile. He put his plastic suit on his body to lose the weight. This was the day of the weigh-in at 5 a.m. He had to lose that last 2 pounds, and he did it. Gomez regrettably recalled the incident himself when he said, "I was 3 pounds over, and I was running with Valcarel. Not making weight was not an option." Don King said, "I had to do it. I had no choice." Wilfredo's closest friends sat back, and they watched everything unfold. They loved Gomez deeply, so it was so heartbreaking to see what was occurring. Toto Penegarciano said, "We would tell him every day to take it seriously, and his answer would always be, 'Es un muerto.' In other words, he is a dead man. I will destroy him," he told me. "I remember the day of the weigh-in, which was the same day as the fight. We had a scale in our room in Las Vegas. He was around 2 or 3 ounces over. I remember him running in the aisles of the room and then going back to the scale. He could not lose 1 ounce. He had nothing left. We were late to the weigh-in, and Suleiman was very angry. He made weight, but he lost strength." The weigh-in was held at the Caesars Palace Hotel Sports Pavilion, which had a 4,500 seat capacity. The fight was shown nationally on closed-circuit television. After both fighters made weight, they reacted. An ebullient Sanchez raised his arms in victory. Gomez, who had been up all evening trying to lose the extra weight, showed little emotion. As the fight neared, Gomez told a reporter, "My future is on the line," a comment that had never held so much truth to it. His passion for boxing had been overshadowed by the need for the limelight, and it turned a magnificent boxer into a stationary defensive target. In one swoop, Gomez was grounded, and there was not one person in his camp that could relay that information to him in a manner in which he would accept it. Later, Gomez would severely regret his actions and learn from them. However, it was not so much that he underestimated Sanchez as much as he overestimated himself, and the advice that he received from people who loved him merely fluttered aimlessly past. Coming into the fight, Gomez put his 32 consecutive knockout streak on the line, while Sanchez entered the ring with a record of 41-1. The fight deserved the super fight label. Sanchez and Gomez were not only the greatest fighters in their respective weight classes at the time, but they also earned the distinctions as being amongst the greatest fighters ever in their weight divisions. One didn't have to be Puerto Rican or Mexican to understand the implications. The headstrong Gomez was intent on keeping his record-setting pace of knockouts alive, while the more balanced Sanchez was out to prove that the underdog status was erroneous on many levels. Steve Farhood, who covered the fight, said it was definitely a super fight. Duran was still hot. This was the fight that they would remember Gomez for. Gomez and Sanchez were the best in their weight classes, and it was the greatest of rivalries between Puerto Rico and Mexicans. To me, that was a super fight. Only Sanchez's WBC World Featherweight title was on the line. Refusing to relinquish his 122-pound belt, Gomez was steadfast in not giving up his own WBC Super Bantamweight belt. Jose Sulaiman was keen on Gomez giving up that belt in order to open the path for another Mexican champion, Lupe Pintor, to eventually step out of the 118-pound division, which he ruled with an iron fist, and take over the 122-pound division. However, there was a process that had to take place. First, an elimination bout between number 3, Juan Meza, and number 4, Carlos Mendoza, which was held on the undercard of Sanchez and Gomez. Second, the winner of the fight would face the winner between number 2, Juan Antonio Lopez, and number 1, Mike Ayala. Of course, that scenario was solely contingent on Gomez losing, which oddsmakers had clearly bet against. Then came the fight itself, which was dictated entirely by Sanchez. The attrition that would occur started with one single punch. Before the men squared off in the centre of the ring, a battle of the bands reverberated through the raucous crowd as the Mexican and Puerto Rican contingents supported their respective bands. Puerto Ricans danced to the sounds of Apollo Sound, a salsa band that Gomez flew in from Puerto Rico, while the Mexican fans chanted for their favourite mariachi band. Both men appeared confident, and Gomez didn't look as if the struggle to make weight had a real impact on him. That would be determined later. As the men stood toe-to-toe with referee Carlos Padilla, confusion reigned momentarily when Padilla insisted on confirming who the chief second was in Sanchez's corner. After the brief commotion, the fighters touched gloves, and the 5,000 fans turned their attention to the type of dream matchup that often never materialises for some reason or another. Whatever Gomez had hoped to achieve with the blistering attack on Sanchez before the fight had worked wonders for him. By the time the Mexican champion reached the ring, he was seething. When the bell sounded, Sanchez danced, but he also put himself in range. Gomez had suggested prior to the bout that Sanchez would fight defensively, but somewhere along the way, he must have changed his tune. Sanchez had made a promise to shut Gomez up and make him pay for his transgressions. Moving less naturally than he had in previous bouts, Gomez's movements reflected reluctance and hesitation. Anxious, both fighters missed uppercuts. Sanchez, however, recognised that everything would stem from the jab, as he shot a 4-5 combination from a distance early in the round. Neither quick nor sharp, Gomez jabbed at air as Sanchez easily shifted to his left. Content to hastily get inside, Gomez pushed Sanchez to the ropes. Sanchez landed a straight right during a chaotic flurry and landed a left hook that sent Gomez down to the canvas. It was extremely rare for Gomez to be so off balance, but Sanchez quickly took advantage as he landed a wide-ranging left hook. Having risen by 4, Gomez looked at Padilla for a sign to continue. Padilla walked over and continued the count. Everything that Wilfredo Gomez stood for had fallen with one punch. It was a cracking punch that landed awkwardly as he fell, but somehow he still absorbed it with the same force. Friends, family members, acquaintances, lovers all watched in horror, tinged with curiosity as a man who had borne the emblem of bravery had slowly fallen to the canvas. As Gomez went down, his entire world exploded with it. Refusing to let this opportunity pass, Sanchez landed another big left hook, then backed Gomez up. The intensity of the round heightened as Sanchez missed a combination and then landed 3 punches with no Gomez response. Gomez clinched and tied up Sanchez to get a breather, but Padilla was right on top of them, and seconds later, shocked fans watched as Sanchez backed Gomez to the opposite side of the ring and made him pay with a right cross. The punch would have knocked out most featherweights, but Gomez decided he would survive the round on his feet. After the right hand, Gomez fell off the ropes and grabbed for Sanchez, but he was too unbalanced to make a strong clinch, and Sanchez punched through his guard. If the early knockdown against Yum in the first title fight only briefly stunned Gomez, this punch left him reeling. Local journalists described the punch and the round itself as both a shock and a nightmare. Gomez said, "After that punch, I wasn't the same. I felt that punch and my face started to swell up because I had to lose so much weight in so little time. That was when I knew that I couldn't win the fight." Jimmy Montoya, a matchmaker for Don King, recalled Sanchez's urgency. He said, "Salvador did everything he wanted to from the start. He went after Wilfredo in the first round. He jumped on him right away. He went to the body. He had fast hands too. Wilfredo took a lot of punishment. I would have told Wilfredo to not stand and punch with him and stay off the ropes. He needed to get inside, punch, and then get out, use feints and movement. Sanchez was so hard to beat. Wilfredo was a good boxer and slugger, and he really needed to come in, feint, boom boom, and then get out again." Vulnerable again, Gomez absorbed another right hand and stumbled back to the place of the original knockdown. The beating continued as Gomez took a right cross that brought him to his knees, followed by an uppercut and a left hook. His only recourse was to punch back, but all that he could muster were harmless arm punches that Sanchez brushed off. Gomez kept Sanchez away for the last 20 seconds and fell into his trainer's arms as the bell sounded. Angel Olivares, who covered the fight, said, "After the first couple of rounds, I said to myself, this is over. It was sad. Salvador Sanchez trained to fight a guy like Wilfredo Gomez. Wilfredo did not train to fight a master like Sanchez." Still wobbly, Gomez followed Sanchez to the corner and missed 3 left uppercuts, but found himself again in the middle of a fierce battle and even landed his best punch of the night, a jarring left hook. Sanchez shrugged it off and baited Gomez to the corner again. This time, Gomez benefited in the role of aggressor and landed 2 major punches during a 13-punch outburst. The round ended with Gomez finding a glimmer of hope. Showtime boxing analyst Al Bernstein said he had moments in that fight. The thing is that it was becoming obvious that Sanchez was fighting much better than people thought he would. Although Wilfredo was winning rounds, it was obvious that it was not going to be Wilfredo's night. The perception and reality was that Sanchez showed power and ability, and it looked inevitable that he would win. Contrary to what many Mexicans had hoped for, Sanchez did not follow up on the first round beating that he administered to the super bantamweight champion. To that point, Sanchez succeeded in hurting Gomez and letting him know who dictated the fight. Deep down, Sanchez fought as if he could end the fight at any time. Whether he was capable of that was still not clear, but in the third, Sanchez looked for one big shot. Surprisingly, Sanchez was content then to trade punches, a left uppercut for his own left hook in the third round, and another left hook that caused Gomez to stumble. The Mexican champion deftly slid to his left nearly every time Gomez threw that vaulted right hand. The move kept him out of any major trouble. In addition to his defensive prowess, Sanchez continued to work that jab in the 4th and 5th rounds. Due to Sanchez's consistent jab, Gomez's eyes were now 2 slits and perfect target for his left hook. Surging forward, Gomez showed life in the 4th when he shortened up his punches, avoided a counter, landed a right cross, a left uppercut and a glancing right hand that Sanchez skillfully turned onto to avoid the brunt of the punch. After another short flurry, Gomez ended the round, staring Sanchez down. Gomez made a beeline for Sanchez in the 5th round, but his opponent brilliantly bobbed and weaved off the ropes and staved off the attack. Gomez was able to land a right uppercut and a short left hook before Sanchez escaped. If Sanchez dominated the early rounds, Gomez was experiencing brief moments of success. For instance, he shook off a body shot and landed a left hook as Sanchez continued to paw with his jab. But just as Gomez started to find his comfort zone, Sanchez ended the round with a shotgun right hand and then reeled off 5 more punches, one after the bell sounded. After a quiet 6th round, Gomez changed course and became a counter-puncher in the 7th. First, Sanchez positioned Gomez perfectly to land 3 hooks to the body and a jab and then 1 more hook. Then Gomez responded by landing a huge right and a left hook. For the first time, Gomez used that hook to confirm that he was still in the fight. Continuing to take the lead, Gomez had even more success as the fighters brawled in the last minute of the round. Still, to Gomez supporters, the fight had an ominous feel to it. Despite landing punches, there was nothing in Gomez's arsenal that concerned Sanchez, a veritable quiet assassin. Even if he had won a round or 2, many felt that the fight was won in the first round. Some wondered if Sanchez was purposefully carrying Gomez as payback. Carlos Palomino, who was there ringside, he said, when he dropped him, and I remembered that he said he wanted to hurt him and did not knock him out, I thought he was carrying him. But my opinion has changed through replays. Gomez was a warrior. It has always been that way when Puerto Ricans and Mexicans fight each other. It comes down to talent or heart. I just saw a guy who refused to go down and kept coming, but Sanchez didn't carry him. Palomino commentated with Sheridan, and their continuous narrative emphasised that Gomez was just a step slower in everything that he tried to do against Sanchez. Palomino went on to say Sanchez was a great boxer, but he was never a puncher. We were shocked at the ease in which Sanchez took him apart. Gomez couldn't quite get to Sanchez like he had done against previous opponents. At this point of the fight, Gomez's eyes were worsening, and by the 8th, his right cheekbone was shattered, reminders of the desperate measures he would have to take. First, he landed a counter right hand and then tied up Sanchez. However, Sanchez was no longer content to pick his spots. He hunted Gomez. The onslaught began with 3 left hooks to the body, followed by a short hook that forced Gomez to slow his attack. Against the ropes, Gomez landed a right hand and then received 2 in return. A huge right hand seconds later left Gomez hanging through the ropes. Sanchez tried to follow up, but it was already over when Carlos Padilla jumped in to stop the fight at 2 minutes and 9 seconds of the 8th round, and he didn't give Gomez a chance to plead his case as he hugged him and called the end to the bout. The move may have saved Gomez's career. The swollen eyes, spat anger, and the desperate pleas to keep fighting fell on deaf ears. Deep down, Gomez knew it was over, and would later accept it. It was an acceptance steeped in self-disgust, though. Padilla had grabbed him as a father would a son, and quickly said the words that solidified the reality that every Puerto Rican had understood since the first knockdown. It was over for their hero. For that night, at the very least. Gomez said, "The referee held me, and I still felt like I could fight. I felt that I could keep going. I could still go on." Prior to Padilla stopping the fight, Valcarel remembered the scene vividly, and he said, "I was very close to the corner. I remember them telling Wilfredo, and he said, 'If you stop this fight, I'll kill you.'" Valcarel also recalled, "He got beat because he got beat. Sanchez wasn't a puncher, but he got lucky. When you get hit in the chin, that's what happens." Everyone at the fight recalled what a warrior Gomez was. Mauricio Sullivan said, "Sanchez put him down, and he wanted to continue. He was screaming to continue. His eyes were swollen, bleeding, and then he gets up and wants to continue. That was the same way he lived life, to the fullest. He showed that he was a warrior and why he's one of the greatest fighters of all time. One more punch could have been fatal. Carlos Padilla gave him the opportunity to continue his brilliant career." Less than a month earlier, Gomez was sharpening his teeth for the tongue lashing he administered to Sanchez, a young and respectful fighter. The Puerto Rican had convinced himself that the psychological battle deserved more attention than the physical one. As he callously ticked off the places where he would hit and hurt Gomez, something happened. His shtick no longer had the same effect. Plamito Espinosa had left the team, and the most important figure, Yamil Chade, had already moved on as well. It was the Wilfredo Gomez show. However, once the action started, the final act had already quickly transformed from a super fight to a bloodbath. Sadly, Gomez's cheeks had already become swollen. Implicitly, Sanchez winked at everyone sitting ringside as if to remind them that he told them so. Once the action resumed, the fight itself became an extraneous act. Everyone wondered how long the abuse would last. Even years later, Gomez's hubris surfaces. He has moments where he accepts the reality that Sanchez was the better man that night, but it is with a mixture of regret and reluctance that he recognises that the stoppage may not have been the best call, but the necessary one. Camp members whisked Gomez out of the ring and away from incriminating questions. While Sanchez's camp celebrated, Gomez suffered a slow death. For the first time, Gomez had been rendered irrelevant, a stark contrast to the belligerence which he showed once the fight was signed. No one saw it coming. Not this way. It was so definitive, and the beating that he received was so intense that no one could have possibly survived it. How someone as passionate and as talented as Gomez was reduced to a marginal talent speaks both of his lack of preparation and how underrated Sanchez was in 1981. But to Gomez's credit, after the abuse that Sanchez received before the fight, he never allowed himself to become a victim. Beneath the cloak of excuses, Gomez never lied to himself. He knew the scope of what Sanchez did to him. Journalist Shirley Norman covered the bout for Ring magazine, and she wrote, "But all of Gomez's former ring artistry and experience were powerless against the iron-bodied and iron-willed Sanchez." Newspaper headlines ranged from "Sanchez silences Gomez in victory" to "Icy Sanchez chills Gomez." Members from the camp began to weigh in on the extent of the problem that existed in the camp. Gomez's lawyer, Gabriel Penagarciano, said, "There's no question the weight influenced the outcome immensely, but that is absolutely no excuse." Uncharacteristically calling for more abuse, Sanchez resented a challenger for the first time and felt he had every angle covered. Sanchez said, "I fought the fight according to the plan I had. I was not surprised. I was prepared for that kind of attack." Meanwhile, Gomez did not become a recluse, but did not seek the solace of friends. That approach did not mean his friends abandoned him, it just meant that Gomez became more introverted now that he was on a mission. Surprisingly, his popularity didn't suffer. After the loss, he said, "I wanted to stay away and think seriously about what I did wrong and how to move forward. I wanted to learn the lesson and accept that I still have the heart and boxing skills to keep conquering the boxing world and show the world that I was born to fight." The bout itself was too one-sided to wrestle Fight of the Year honours away from the Sugar Ray Robinson and Thomas Hearns fight. Fans expect a super fight to include an intriguing ebb and flow, and at least one moment where the outcome is in doubt. In that sense, this super fight was mundane. Sanchez did not have to reach the zenith of his boxing skills to turn back Gomez. It was over after the first round, and that was what infuriated Gomez's followers. Gomez refused to go to the post-fight press conference. Sanchez felt energised by the outcome and his overall performance when he told a reporter, "I fought exactly according to my plan. I really enjoyed fighting Gomez. In fact, I was so eager for this fight. I wish we could have gone 15 rounds. Contrary to what boxing experts and fans were feeling at the time about the fight, the judges, Dwayne Ford and Charles Minker, only had Sanchez ahead by 2 points at the time of the stoppage, while Henry Aspuru somehow had him winning by 1 point. There is always something to be said for going home again. And at one point in his life, Wilfredo Gomez had to go home again to become whole. Loss and redemption will take you on a journey to that place. Paco Valcarel said, "We stayed in Las Vegas for 4 days. During those 4 days, we planned what we were going to say when we got back to Puerto Rico. The press was waiting for us. He got glasses so no one would see his eyes. The mayor of Guaynabo, Junior Cruz, made a press conference at City Hall. Wilfredo told the people that he had a problem because he got on a scale which was different than the one that was being used at the weigh-in. The truth was that Gabby Penagarciano and best man at his wedding, Jose Penagarciano, took Wilfredo to that restaurant, and he also didn't do his best training." As much time as Paco Valcarel and Gomez spent on devising a speech to give to Puerto Rican people, Valcarel was blindsided. He said, "We got there, and I didn't know what he was going to say. I thought he would say that he made mistakes and he would be back in a rematch, but instead, he talked about the difference in the scales. He had an ace up his sleeve. I don't know why he said that." Puerto Rican sportscaster Rafael Bracero vividly recalls that emotions that reflected the pulse of the people. Although it was difficult to grasp how one-dimensional the fight was, it was not hard to forgive their favourite son. He said, "I was not shocked by the loss, because Sanchez had the ability to hit first and send messages." After the fight, Wilfredo made a press conference, but he made an excuse as to why he lost. But the Puerto Rican people love him, even in bad times, and he was in bad times. When Gomez returned to Puerto Rico after the loss to Sanchez, he had a lot of explaining to do. The press, which had a cordial relationship with Gomez, would not be willing to grant him a pass. It would be unfair and inaccurate to draw an analogy with the reception Roberto Duran received after returning from New Orleans in 1980. But similarly, people wanted answers. The Puerto Rican people had grown to love Gomez because of his straightforward approach in the ring and his humility outside of it. There was no pretension to when it came to Gomez. In fact, he revealed a laid-back personality that drew people to him. More importantly, the fans, quite knowledgeable, knew what to expect from Gomez, and even though their champion fought until the end, it was much more complicated. Backlash after the fight was muted because of the courage that Gomez showed. He could have easily given in after the first round knockdown. Only a handful of unequivocally great fighters have gotten beaten so thoroughly as Gomez had. Yet, image-wise, Gomez recovered nearly unscathed. Could it be possible that the Puerto Rican people didn't mourn the loss of a great fighter because they knew it was an aberration? They forged on alongside him, knowing that the journey would be littered with countless hurdles. Journalist and his friend Chu Garcia, he said, upon his return to Puerto Rico, the mayor of Guaynabo City and his intimate friend Junior Cruz made a press conference to help him win a pardon of the people. And Gomez apologised for his defeat, but he never indicated that the loss was not for maintaining the proper weight, and he still believed he was better than Sanchez. Many people forgave him, but others did not because they knew his indiscipline and his individualism. One of the most influential boxing journalists in Puerto Rican history, Rafael Bracero, had a ringside seat for the dramatic return. Personally invested, Bracero had mentioned a young Gomez in the same pantheon of historic boxing names such as Sugar Ray Robinson. So, he also wanted an explanation. Bracero said, when he returned to Puerto Rico, he was basically crying. From the first question, you could see he was bruised and swollen, wearing his sunglasses. Then he said, sorry, and he apologised and started crying intensely. He was very concerned for what he did. He had an expression like he had done something bad or betrayed the Puerto Rican people. Very few believed he wouldn't be back. At 25, Gomez was young and would physically recover quickly from the facial injuries. Emotionally, the setback would take more than a confidence boost. Gomez needed to completely change and refocus his priorities. He wouldn't be competitive again if allowed outside influences to infringe upon his responsibilities as a fighter. Gomez said, when I was defeated, I learned a difficult lesson that I shouldn't take for granted any opponent. I was looking forward to a rematch with Salvador Sanchez, and I began to train harder than ever. I knew in my gut that I could win the fight. I was obsessed and dreamed about the rematch. I even cried because I knew that I could beat him fair and square. On several occasions, Gomez emphasised his disappointment with the handling of the fight by stating that a host of friends and confidants abandoned him after the loss. He never travelled with a large entourage, but those hangers-on in the background were now gone. He said, Don King paid from my winnings more than $80,000 travelling, hotel, transportation and food expenses for my guests. People from showbiz, journalists, everybody left, and I returned to Puerto Rico with hairstylist Magalé Feebles and actress Johanna Rosalie. Yamil Chade stood by my side even though our contract had expired. He stayed with me and accompanied me to Panama because I knew that his company was good for both, more for me. Days after returning to Puerto Rico, Gomez made a heartfelt plea to his people to forgive this one digression and said the fight would be a brief detour in his career. Before long, Gomez was back in the gym and eventually took a quick tune-up before facing significant opposition. But to this day, Gomez has never recovered and may never do so from that loss. Although the accounts rarely seem to match up, it is clear that Gomez secluded himself from the public and did not regularly keep in touch with all of those close to him. Puerto Rican journalists recognised with clarity what had happened to Gomez against Sanchez. Unlike outsiders, all reporters from the country were at that time privy to the surmised changes that had occurred within their nation's iconic fighter. No one was going to be able to change Gomez. In his mind, he knew who he was, and he wouldn't sidestep or completely ignore any advice that he didn't deem beneficial. Angel Olivares said Gomez was 100% good until he started to meet the wrong people and the wrong women. He separated from the real world. After the loss to Sanchez, things happened. He was one Wilfredo Gomez before the bout, and another Wilfredo Gomez after it. He was not the guy I knew after the amateurs when we met in Panama, and he picked me up for the fight between Esteban de Zeus and Roberto Duran. Back then he was a good student. He obeyed. Chu, as in Chu Garcia, and I used to interview him, and he was very nice. He was very easygoing. He would talk to me and Chu at the weigh-in, and he was very easygoing. But after Sanchez, things changed. Having suffered a devastating knockout defeat to featherweight King Sanchez nearly 7 months earlier, Wilfredo Gomez recovered, began a new improved training regime after enrolling in the Clínica de Deportiva in his hometown of Sanctuary, and returned to defend his WBC super bantamweight belt against Juan Kid Meza for his first real test since the loss to Sanchez. Gomez hemmed and hawed and never actually relinquished his 122-pound belt when he fought Sanchez. It created friction with Jose Sulaiman, who had been grooming Mexican stalwart Lupe Pintor to abandon 118 pounds and camp out in the intermediate division that Gomez had defined for so long. Paco Valcarel said after Wilfredo lost to Sanchez, he fought in Atlantic City. He decided to come back to 122 pounds. He hired Dwight Santiago from the Sport Clinic to work with him. Sulaiman wanted him to relinquish the 122-pound belt to give an opportunity to Pintor, his friend. They invited me and Wilfredo to meet with Yamil Chade. I went alone. They wanted to force me to sign a resignation to agree that Wilfredo would give up his title. I got a letter from Dwight Santiago that said Wilfredo would make the 122-pound weight limit. I remember Sulaiman was talking about how he was concerned about Wilfredo's health. I was a lawyer. When Sulaiman came to push me, I got the letter and gave it to him. The doctor said he could make it without any problem. Sulaiman went completely crazy. He forced me to sign 4 mandatories. The first was Meza, then Lopez, then Rubaladino, and then Pintor. I remember he was screaming when he said that we wouldn't relinquish the crown. That's when he told us about the mandatories, and we made all of them. Wilfredo beat all of them. Yet Gomez himself was too shrewd to just put his belt on the line. Gomez associates and the WBC hammered out a deal where they would sign 4 options for defences, with the last one against Lupe Pintor. Thus, for the great 118-pounder, the path to greatness in another division forced him to meet Gomez head-on. Even if the Puerto Rican had slightly slipped and was not the great fighter that everyone remembered, it would still be a difficult fight. Meza was the first defence negotiated between Gomez and Sulaiman. Instead of allowing Gomez to virtually run his own camp, now he was expected to vigilantly adhere to a 2-meal-a-day and a 1,500-calorie diet that would ensure he would make weight easily. While Gomez struggled with his conditioning, Meza faced a different set of issues. Jimmy Montoya said, "Hell yeah, Meza was mentally ready, but he was not 100% physically ready because he was coming off an eye operation. That was the only thing handicapping him. We couldn't postpone the fight." The 15-round bout would be held at the Atlantic City Playboy Hotel and Casino on the 27th of March 1982. Meza entered the bout with 37 victories and 4 losses, including an impressive 31 knockouts. However, his resume proved unremarkable. With the exception of a recent 10-round stoppage of Carlos Mendoza, none of his victories were proof that he could compete with the current champion. In the other corner, Gomez, now 34, 1-1 with 34 knockouts, was eager to erase any remnants of the nightmarish loss to Sanchez the previous August. Meza weighed at 120.75 pounds, while Gomez was a pound heavier. In order to get prepared for Gomez's attack, Montoya took Meza to the mountains to train, and he sparred with Jose Caba and Nicky Perez. Throughout the training camp, Montoya implored his fighter to take advantage of Gomez after he punched, because then That's when he was most vulnerable. Ironically, Sanchez was at ringside. Going into the bout, Gomez's motivation was to extend his record 13 consecutive knockouts in title defences. From the outset of the fight, Meza held his guard high. Gomez had difficulty getting inside in the first round and the early part of the second round, but instead of forcing the action, the champion feinted, then pushed a straight right hand. It was the first real combination of the bout, and it occurred at the beginning of the second round. Often Gomez had his way with taller, slimmer boxers, but Meza was not intimidated by Gomez. In fact, after Gomez landed that 1-2 combination in the second round, Meza waved his hands and called for Gomez to come to him. They jawed as they went back to their respective corners at the end of the round. Jimmy Montoya said Meza wasn't afraid of anybody. I told Meza in the corner between rounds to give him angles, don't go straight back on him. But he wasn't intimidated by Gomez, and I remember he told me that before the fight. Don't postpone it. Throughout the bout, referee Harold Vallan would warn Gomez for his borderline low blows, but the champion was also connecting on some vicious right hands. Meza's corner was incensed at the bias they believed Vallan showed Gomez, and verbally questioned Vallan's refusal to take points away at the very least. Often with Gomez, the rounds represented 3 minutes of constant action. Gomez started the third round with a sharp right hand. Then Gomez briefly showed his ring genius. First he slipped a left hook, then a straight right, took 2 steps back, avoided another punch, and was still in position to punch. It was pure beauty in the ring. Gomez, surprisingly, didn't match Meza's punch output in the round, which was a rare occurrence. Gomez, the smaller fighter, punched up and knocked Meza off balance at the end of the 5th round. Not done, he pushed his opponent to the ropes, landed a right to Meza's ear and a crushing left hook. Once again, Gomez displayed his extraordinary defensive skills as he continually made Meza miss again and again with counters. Jimmy Montoya said, Meza was a puncher. He had the power to get a guy with one shot. I told him not to go toe-to-toe with Gomez. Don't widen your punches. But Wilfredo caught on to this and tore him up. But he learned a lot from fighting Wilfredo Gomez. A tough opponent, but not one who was able to adapt to Gomez's constant pressure, Meza didn't appear hurt in the fight, but the 6th round proved to be his last. Gomez started the round with 3 left hooks, the second of which sent Meza reeling into the middle of the ring. Even though Meza was still fighting back, he was starting to absorb cleaner punches than he had earlier. With less than a minute to go in the 6th round, Gomez finally got his wish and he trapped Meza. With nowhere to go and no recourse to the barrage of punches, Meza watched helplessly as Vallan calmly stepped in to stop the fight at 2 minutes and 28 seconds of the 6th round. There was no response from Meza or his corner. Whether it was an early stoppage or not, Vallan's decision may have saved some years on Meza's career, since Gomez did land 2 right crosses with bad intentions in that final round. Jimmy Montoya said, At first I thought the fight was stopped too early, but then I changed my mind. If it would have continued, then Meza would have stayed in front of him and might have gotten hurt. He was a tough guy, and he may have gotten hurt if he kept fighting back. After the fight, Meza acknowledged the illegal tactics, but did not use them as an excuse. He said, he was dirty, but not that dirty. It had been over a year since Gomez last defended his title. During that time, he hardened himself for a rematch with Sanchez, which he knew would eventually come to fruition. First, he knew that he had to look good in these defences, and second, he had to alter his aggressive style. Realising that he had made a huge tactical mistake the first time around, Gomez could no longer be the aggressive challenger. He had to be the smart one. He could no longer fight psychological battles through the press as he had done with Sanchez. For the first time, he saw how that act actually backfired. The thoughts of the rematch consumed Gomez's every waking moment. If Gomez was once drawn to the spotlight for the 6 months after the loss, he moved into the shadows and made no public appearances. His love for boxing was predicted upon his domination, and his domination and appeal was inextricably linked to his knockout punch. So when Sanchez changed all of that by proving even the fiercest, most intimidating knockout puncher in the world could be tamed, it proved gut-wrenching for Gomez. Physically, the loss to Sanchez did not change anything. That fight marked the first time that Gomez took a significant beating, even though the fight itself only lasted 8 rounds. But when Gomez came back to Puerto Rico with Valcarel 4 days after the loss and was forced to hide behind sunglasses, it was his pride that needed repair. One of the best ways to put that fight behind him was to just focus on boxing, even if it meant that close relationships were temporarily pushed in the background. Yet Meza was not a pushover, and Gomez felt he had proved something with the knockout and began to slow the process of sowing the seeds of disappointment that so many of his fans still felt. He said, "I always felt that I was entitled to give the fans what they wanted. I felt that when I lost to Sanchez, that I also lost their trust and respect, and I wanted to gain that back." For his 15th defence, Gomez pounded Juan Antonio Lopez and stopped him in 10 rounds on June the 11th in a return bout on the undercard of Larry Holmes versus Jerry Cooney that he described as a favour to Jose Sulaiman. On the 18th of August 1982, Gomez, now 36-1-1, was set to defend his WBC title against Roberto Rubaldino in the Hiram Bithorn Stadium. The fight, promoted by Don King Productions, was televised on Mexico Televisa and in the United States over the Don King Sports and Entertainment Network. Rubaldino was part of the 4-fight package of title defences that Sulaiman had ordered Gomez to accept if he were to keep his WBC Super Bantamweight title. Gomez made the 122-pound weight limit, while Rubaldino also came in at 122 pounds, but struggled to get down to that figure. Mentally, Gomez couldn't completely devote himself to the man in front of him. It was impossible. Salvador Sanchez was dead. Nearly a week earlier, Salvador Sanchez had died immediately when he drove directly into a truck at 4 a.m. while heading towards a training site. Sanchez was training to meet Juan Laporte on the 15th of September, and it was odd that he was driving his Porsche 928 at 4 a.m. on the way to San Jose Iturbide, his training site. His normal training routine found him in bed at 10 p.m. and up at 5:30 a.m. Boxing manager Benny Giorgino said, "The Mexican papers say there is no way of knowing if Sanchez was drinking. They say the truck that hit him was on the wrong side of the road." Sanchez was buried on the following Friday. Danny Lopez, now retired, wanted to attend the funeral but couldn't make it on time. "They bury him quick down there," he said. The boxing community mourned, and even though many questions remained, such as why Sanchez was driving at that time, they didn't overshadow the sense of loss that enveloped the boxing community. That deep sense of loss was exacerbated by the way that he lived his life, humble and devoted. Supporters from all spectrums came out in droves to express their gratitude. Howie Albert said, "I'm just heartbroken." Anyone who knew Sanchez felt the same way. From the professional manner in which he approached his training regime to the respect he showed everyone who knew him, Sanchez established a legacy that was still blossoming. Ironically, at the time of his death, the fighter was entertaining thoughts of leaving the sport and turning to the medical profession. The intent was reflected in an interview where he confirmed, "I've already distinguished myself in boxing. Now I would like to distinguish myself in life. I would like to continue to study and become a doctor," he said. The condolences that poured in reflected not only the way Sanchez lived his life, but the overall sadness that people would never be able to see him develop into an all-time great that he was destined to become. Mauricio Sulaiman, current WBC president, said, "It was a shock. Nobody could believe it was true when the news advised of the accident. My father was devastated, and it took many months for it to sink in. A young, talented, exemplary kid with a bright future had just perished. A national hero was gone, and a legend was born. I remember all of the calls and messages that flooded my home and the WBC office. I also remember all of the interviews. It was just simply a tragedy." Sanchez was already a surefire Hall of Famer, but the path was littered with more accolades and performances that would have placed him in the upper echelon of boxing history. Boxing trainer and manager Abel Sanchez said, "Mexico was very saddened. He died at such a young age, and we never got a chance to see how great he was going to become. He was at that point where he was going to break out and become a superstar." At the time of Sanchez's death, Wilfredo Gomez was in the midst of trading for Roberto Rubaldino. Then he received a call from a friend, Hall of Famer Jose Torres. He said, "I was the first person who told Gomez what had happened to Sanchez. I was working at Diaro Les Presena. The first thing I did was call Gomez and I said, "Hey Gomez, you know what just happened?" He said, "What?" I told him, "Salvador Sanchez died." Then Gomez got emotional. Once Gomez was informed of the funeral arrangements, he made the flight arrangements to fly to Mexico for the funeral and pay tribute to his nemesis. He also lost motivation, as if to ask himself, "What am I fighting for?" Deflated from the news, Gomez was not distraught. Rafael Bracero called Wilfredo and he said, "I got hold of him for an interview, and my first question was, what goes through your mind now that the man you desperately wanted to fight for a revenge from such a disastrous loss is no longer alive?" He started to cry like a child. He would make amends and show the Mexican people and Sanchez's family members that what had happened last August was part of the boxing show, just business. Mauricio Suleiman also said that was huge for Wilfredo to go to the funeral. He showed so much respect, and even now he keeps coming back to Mexico. The people in Mexico like him and respect him very much, and that's the reason why. The act was so genuine, not a contrived one to gain publicity. Boxing journalist Chu Garcia said Wilfredo took a flight from Puerto Rico and bought flowers for Salvador's coffin. He acknowledged then that Salvador Sanchez had been the greatest boxer he had ever faced, and that he dreamed many times of having the chance to face Salvador in the boxing ring again. When he visited the grave of Sanchez, it was praised by Puerto Ricans and Mexicans because it was a humanitarian gesture and an act of respect for his conqueror. That move changed everything, or at least started to heal a lot of wounds. In the midst of his own personal derailment outside the ring, Gomez went to Mexico to say goodbye to his nemesis. Even then, Gomez was not greeted warmly by the multiple Mexican fans, who still held him accountable for the unprofessional or rude way he treated Sanchez before their epic matchup. Rubaldino, who at the time was ranked by the Ring magazine as the 5th best bantamweight in the world behind Lupe Pintor, Julian Solis, Alberto Davila and Jorge Lejan, had won his last 13 bouts and avenged his loss to Lejan, a former world champion. So going into the bout, Gomez was still trying to prove that he had improved rather than regressed from the loss to Sanchez. Psychologically, he would never let the memories of that fight leave him. Not as he entered the ring for Rubaldino, not as he moved into retirement. For him, it was not possible. Sports writer Carlos Navarez said, "When I asked him what happened, he said, 'He was better than me. I am hoping to have that rematch. I am hoping to have that rematch in heaven.'" That was Wilfredo. So, moving into the fight with Rubaldino and going into the first round, Gomez appeared to glide around the ring as he tried to create angles. Not concerned about his opponent's unorthodox southpaw style, Gomez worked a left hook and later landed a vicious right hand. One tactic that worked well for Gomez was when he squared up in front of Rubaldino and gave himself room to work on the inside. In fact, Gomez squeezed in one final straight right to Rubaldino's neck as the bell sounded to end the round. Gomez didn't slow down after the action-packed first round. Instead of focusing on Rubaldino's head, he went to the body with the definitive left hooks. Moving constantly, Gomez never allowed himself time to sit on his punches. He relied on a pawing jab, a staple in previous fights, to try and get inside, but he also looked for that one big punch as the round closed. Seconds elapsed before Gomez cornered Rubaldino and blistered him. First, he stabilised Rubaldino with a left hook to the body, and then he countered with an onslaught of punches that connected. Rubaldino fought back, but got punished with an uppercut and a straight right between his guard for his ill-advised risk. Rubaldino, clearly out of his league, suffered a cut above his left eye in the third. Gomez took advantage by varying the speed of his punches in the fourth round and took a more methodical approach as his energy from earlier rounds was clearly sapped away. Rubaldino landed his straight left in the fifth and coped with Gomez's low blows. Still, Gomez didn't look himself in this or the fourth round. The question was, had he punched himself out too early, or just miscalculated how much stamina he had going into the fight? Gomez really hurt Rubaldino with a big left hook in the seventh round as he tormented him against the ropes. Both men had had moments in the fight, but Gomez landed the much harder punches. He eventually set Rubaldino free, but lured him back in towards the end of the round to land a couple of more body shots. Ribaldino did not come out for the 8th round. The referee, Isidro Rodriguez, called an end to the bout and awarded Gomez the technical knockout victory. It was Gomez's 16th title defence and 37th knockout in 37 victories. He earned $175,000 to Ribaldino's $40,000 purse. Some fighters claim to want to die in the ring and fight every second of every round as if their lives depended upon it. Other fighters make similar claims, but the assertions are nothing more than mere bluster as they move away from confrontation at each juncture. When it came to fighting with a warrior spirit, there was no pretense in December 1982 at the Superdome when Wilfredo Gomez and Lupe Pintor battled for Gomez's 122-pound title. Pintor and Gomez were adversaries who boasted of never taking a step back in the ring and always lived up to such declarations. According to Salvador Sanchez, Gomez reaped the benefits of still having Chide in his corner. Even without Chide, this was a dream matchup. Sanchez said he knew very well about Yamil's intimate relationship with Jose Sulaiman, and he used him without being his manager to get a fight with Lupe Pintor. Several narratives made headlines leading up to the WBC Super Bantamweight Championship. First, the late great Salvador Sanchez died 5 months earlier in the car crash, and at the time of his death, Sanchez was the WBC featherweight champ, and there had been talk of an eventual rematch with Gomez. Putting the rivalry aside, Gomez had visited Sanchez's gravesite to pay his final respects. The loss of Sanchez had left a gaping hole in the sport. To many, Lupe Pintor, who hailed from Cuauhtémoc, a borough of Mexico City, and held the WBC bantamweight crown, was next in line. Urged to dedicate his fight to Sanchez's memory, Pintor declined. To him, it would not have been an honest gesture. Instead, he focused on Gomez and the 122-pound belt. Regarding the call to dedicate his fight to his fallen countryman, Pintor said, "I respected Sanchez very much, but doing that, it's not my style." But there were distractions. According to promoter Don King, the fight itself, with Thomas Hearns and Wilfred Benitez as the headliner, was not selling as it should have been, so he had to cut a portion of each fighter's purse. It was reported that King reduced Benitez and Hearns' purses by $250,000 each. Gomez's lawyer, Paco Valcarel, said at first King offered Wilfredo $400,000, but the show was not doing well. King called then and said, "I have to reduce the purses." So instead of the $400,000, Gomez had to settle for $300,000. It was reported to be an aggregate $250,000 pay cut between Pintor and Gomez from a $750,000 purse. Well, Valcarel continued and he said, "So, Wilfredo told Chide, since I am supposed to pay you, now you are going to have to get your money from Don King from what he cut from my purse. I am not going to pay you a penny. You make your money with King." I am not sure if Gomez ever paid Chide that money. Surprisingly, Chide, a shrewd businessman, desired to work with Gomez in any capacity whatsoever. Being close to Gomez was clearly a huge benefit, even if Chide did not gain financially. Gomez said, "At some point, Chide told me that he wouldn't charge me anything. When he was in charge, I only had to sign the contract and he did everything else. When I did my own negotiations, it was a nightmare. These people were sharks and took advantage of me. It often took time for me to gain strength for my fights, and these negotiations took a huge mental toll on me. Chide was the glue that kept everything together." Cuyo Hernandez, Pintor's trainer, refused to settle for anything less than what Gomez was offered. During the negotiations, Hernandez, a strict disciplinarian, would not budge from that stance. Don Chargin said Cuyo wanted to know what Gomez was getting, and he kept saying, "We want the same as what Wilfredo is getting." There was no way the fight was getting made if Pintor got a penny less. By claiming that the entire fight card was in jeopardy, Don King had rationalised his decision to cut the purses. Every fighter was aware that King was only out for himself, but the significant pay cuts still drew the ire of Hearns. Prior to the move, Hearns and Benitez had signed contracts that stipulated they would earn $1.5 million and a percentage of the gate. Emmanuel Stewart, Hearns' manager at the time, said about a week ago, Don King asked us to take a substantial cut. I'm not going to say what it was, but it was substantial, and that's why Thomas is upset. He has made every effort to promote this fight. He broke training last week to go to Houston for the Holmes-Cobb fight. He rode in that parade here on Monday when he could have been getting a rub-down. He was the only fighter in the parade, and he feels his image has been damaged. Don King had reduced the purses to $1.35 million and hinted at a possible increase if the ticket sales improved. In an interview with Peter Alfano of the New York Times, Emmanuel Stewart tried to spin the reductions as a personal assault on Hearns and argued that the decision would injure his reputation as one of the best fighters in the world. A card that pitted the slick boxer and Benitez against the murderous puncher was not living up to its billing, as only half of the predicted 40,000 tickets had been reported to be sold. Collectively, all four fighters, Hearns, Benitez, Gomez and Pintor, did not extend themselves to continue with their promotional responses. In fact, Hearns was the only fighter to attend a parade to promote the fight. Gomez spoke at the time and he said, "I got very upset when King told me that. He told me right when I was getting ready to fight, so I had no option but to fight. I had a brief moment and it was a big distraction. That could have caused me to lose the fight." The second storyline revolved around Gomez's resurgence. Gomez had begun to reinvent himself after that devastating loss to Sanchez in August of '81. Not only did Gomez become more disciplined outside of the ring, but he also tried a new training regime which was implemented by Panamanian trainer Pelin Avila and a strict diet that was instituted by close friend Dr. Bobby Munoz Zayas that provided him with more energy to last into those late rounds. Gomez said, "I went to Panama to finish my training program for about 3 months, and for the last 2 months, Bobby Munoz Zayas was in charge of my eating habits. Initially, I began training in Puerto Rico, then I moved to Panama, and from there, I left for Las Vegas." Bobby Munoz Zayas' involvement was essential because he was right on everything I ate and did, so as not to affect my performance on the night of the fight. To Gomez, Pintor was just another hurdle along the way as he looked to cement his legacy in as many divisions as his growing body would allow. Gomez announced that Pintor would be his 17th and final defence as a super bantamweight champion, and he would set his sights on the more competitive featherweight division. A sidebar story emerged with Gomez's need to reassure critics that he still moved, punched and reacted to adversity like the old Gomez. Lupe Pintor offered him the ultimate test, one that he had to impressively overcome. Gomez said, "The fight was key to prove all my fighting skills and my will to be one of the greatest champions of all time." The WBC tried to force Gomez's hand as it tried to get another champ. Gomez said, "Because of the constant warnings to defend my title, I decided to leave behind my defeat and fight Guadalupe Pintor in the 122-pound division. I had 17 world title fights, made a record having 17, all by KO. Then from here, I was going to go for my second belt that was held by Juan Laporte in the 126-pound division. The bout with Pintor was placed on the undercard of the main event in New Orleans Superdome, which of course pitted Thomas Hearns against Wilfred Benitez for the WBC light middleweight crown. The fight was shown on HBO pay-per-view and at 150 closed-circuit locations. With ticket sales plummeting, the Mexico versus Puerto Rico rivalry would garner much-needed attention. Pintor entered the ring with 49 wins, 5 losses and a draw. A shade under 5'5" and age 27, coming in at 121.5 pounds, Pintor was the smaller of the two fighters. Despite Pintor's slim frame, he punched with authority as he had knocked out 38 of his opponents. He was coming off 2 wins in 1982, a 10-round decision over Wan Lejean and a late stoppage of Seong Hon Lee. Pintor told a reporter, "This is the most important fight for me. No one thinks I can move up and win another title. I'll never fight at 118 again." A supremely focused Gomez waved to his fans and flashed a reassuring smile as he entered the ring. As the WBC Super Bantamweight champion, Gomez had won each of his matches by knockout. Still, there was conflicting reports as to whether Gomez was in ideal condition to face Pintor. Since that loss to Sanchez, Gomez reconfigured his team to insert people who were serviceable in the role they needed to play. Essentially, Gomez's trainer didn't come back for Pintor. Gomez's health and training regime were both elements that needed to be looked at post-Sanchez. Gomez said, I brought in Dr. Bobby Munoz-Zayas, and he helped me get down to 122 pounds. He worked with me for 2 months and supervised everything I ate. He also watched my sparring sessions. I trained with Federico Plumito and Pelin Avila for this bout. Prior to calling on Zayas for guidance, Gomez had little discipline when it came to his overall training regime. But, after Sanchez, he knew that the only way he would last and maintain his dominance was to divert from his current methods. He said, Bobby Zayas had me eat a lot of salads and meats. He also had me drink a lot of water. I think he had me on a 1,200 calorie diet to lose the weight. But one thing had changed. Before, when I lost weight, I couldn't eat anything and I was very weak by fight time. Zayas let me eat and still make the weight, and I felt much better. I give him a lot of credit, and he never let me pay him anything. Lawyer Francisco Paco Valserel, who was brought in the camp during the Sanchez fight, recalled a different scenario of what went down. He said, Bobby Munoz-Zayas started working with Wilfredo for the bout with Pintor. Wilfredo called me and said, Paco, I am dizzy and dehydrated. I immediately called Angel Olivares, the sport director, and he recommended bringing in Zayas. Zayas had worked well with the Puerto Rican national basketball team, a medical advisor for the Olympic Committee, and was an obstetrician. Zayas was sent to Wilfredo in New Orleans, where he instituted a new diet. At the time, Gomez was at least 3 or 4 pounds over 122. What he saw was that Gomez was so dehydrated that he could not lose any more weight. Zayas had Gomez do the Atkins diet and only eat meat, no carbohydrates. Then he made weight. Angel Olivares recalled the moment himself vividly. He said, Wilfredo had a problem with the weight before the Pintor fight. The Sunday before the fight, Yamil Chade called me before and said, I need a doctor. Get me a doctor. What happened? I asked him. He said that it was about weight problems. And I told him, I will look for a doctor. I went to the Basketball Federation and I'll look for the doctor. I get into the office and Bobby Munoz-Zayas is sitting there, and I told him that Wilfredo has problems and Chade called me to find a doctor, and he told me, tell Yamil Chade to send me a plane ticket. I will go immediately. That's when he became Wilfredo's personal doctor. From that point on, Bobby Munoz-Zayas saved Gomez's life in the fights to come. Calling on Zayas completely changed the tenure of the camp. A brilliant move ended up paying huge dividends for Gomez and his team for this fight and the following championship defences. If it were a doctor or a different temperament and one who was less assertive or myopic, the move may have been disastrous. However, Zayas proved to be the perfect antidote to a desperate situation. He was knowledgeable, proactive, and most importantly, meshed well with Gomez. Zayas remembered getting a call from Olivares, who was contacted by Yamil Chade. He said, they called me 3 or 4 days before the fight to help him with the preparation. I had a game, but immediately after I get everything together, I get on the plane and I went to take care of Wilfredo. I didn't ask Wilfredo about what was happening with his training because I didn't want him to feel bad, but everything was all there. They were all eating in the same room with Wilfredo and he wasn't eating at all because he couldn't lose the weight. He was very weak. It was something very crazy. I remember seeing him for the first time and he was so weak that he couldn't talk. He looked at me and said, I am worried, Bobby. I am very worried. I want to eat, but I can't eat, or I will gain weight. If I eat, I will gain weight and I need to lose weight. Weight issues were still present for Gomez. With the exception of his 1 foray up at featherweight for the Sanchez fight, Gomez only fought at 126 pounds one other time. Gomez had not let his devastating loss to Sanchez define his career. Since his loss, he was 5-0, all wins coming by knockouts. Having knocked out each fighter, within 10 rounds he maintained a remarkable record of stopping 94% of his opponents. He had a 2-inch reach advantage and was a year younger than Pintor, but Pintor's reputation as a warrior preceded him. With 49 victories, 5 defeats and a draw, with 38 knockouts, Pintor suffered questionable losses to inferior competition, but he also beat excellent fighters such as Carlos Zarate. Most of Pintor's knockouts came after the 8th round, as he did not possess the knockout power of Gomez. Paco Valcarel said, I was concerned. I stayed in Puerto Rico to watch the fight at my house. Somehow, Bobby Munoz-Zayas made miracles. Gomez was not in shape to fight 15 rounds, but he was a superman. I remember how Plamito would run out to the middle of the ring and carry Wilfredo back to the corner. Regarding the pre-fight hype, Gomez had learned his lesson with Salvador Sanchez. Having aggravated Sanchez by boasting of how easily he would pick him apart, Gomez left himself vulnerable in the ring. Many fans, including ringside commentator and former world champ Carlos Palomino, originally thought that Sanchez carried Gomez in order to mete out more punishment. He said, "At first I thought that Sanchez definitely carried Gomez, but after I watched the fight again, I no longer think that way." Similarly, Pintor, who was involved in a fight where Welsh fighter Johnny Owen died after their brutal bout, was not one to kindle any controversy when it came to the pre-fight histrionics. West Coast promoter Don Chargin recognised a different Gomez this time around. There had been too much tension before and after Sanchez's death, and Gomez did not want to reopen any wounds. Chargin recalled, "We thought we could steal something with Pintor in this fight. I thought that Lupe would get this guy. He had moments, but Wilfredo looked very strong. The Mexican press was really impressed with Wilfredo. He showed the proper respect, and it was refreshing to see." As much as Gomez may have changed since the Sanchez loss, one aspect of his fighting style stayed constant. He would fight until the bitter end. Not everything was peaceful between the fighters, as Gomez recalled one incident where, in his words, he said that he would kill me during a press conference. "I didn't let what he said affect me. I didn't care. I was well prepared for that fight." According to Gomez, what Pintor said never reached the press and was not in Pintor's character, but Gomez distinctly recalls him making that promise, and the Puerto Rican champ only used it as motivation. He said, "I just answered him back with dirty words. I never took it as a real threat. It didn't really concern me." What did concern Gomez was how Munoz-Zayas was going to get him to lose the weight and also give him an added spark, which he sorely needed. Training-wise, Gomez dictated every move that was made in the camp. He had been at it too long to have it any other way. Still, Munoz-Zayas was a busy man and refused to work with any athlete who was going to waste his time. Deep down, Munoz-Zayas respected Gomez. Everyone in Puerto Rico did. There was little reason not to. He was on the back end of a career where he belonged in the pantheon of the greatest Puerto Rican athletes of all time. Munoz-Zayas said, "Anyone can do what I did. If you want to lose weight, you can cut carbohydrates." I gave him a high-protein meal of fish and meat, and I stopped him from eating carbs. I told the people around him when I came in, "You cannot eat here with Wilfredo. If you want to eat, you must go down to the hotel to eat and drink, because Wilfredo will stay here with me and eat. Everyone else, out." The circle of friends and associates around Gomez had grown tighter over the years. It may have appeared that Gomez immediately trusted Munoz-Zayas, but that trust was established years earlier when Gomez went to Munoz-Zayas, who at the time was the medical director of the Olympic Committee, to take a look at his swollen right hand. Munoz-Zayas administered an injection to ease the pain, and Gomez was able to continue to fight. Munoz-Zayas said, "When I work with any fighter or any athlete, the people around him have to understand that I am the doctor, and what I say has to be done at all times. No arguments. All athletes trust me, and that's very important. Wilfredo trusted me a lot. They behaved very nicely with me, and there were no problems at all." Anyone who knew Gomez understood how much he needed Pintor. It may not have cemented his legacy, that was already secure, but a win over Pintor would appease some fans who never let Gomez forget about the loss to Sanchez. Unlike some fighters who needed that extra motivation, Gomez was not the sentimental type. He didn't dedicate fights or look back nostalgically on the past. He always lived in the present. Nor was he naive, and he knew how valuable a victory would be for his career. Eventually, the wait was over. Everyone who witnessed Munoz-Zayas' influence during those couple of days in New Orleans waxed poetically about his ability to take over. Although Zayas admitted that Gomez was occasionally difficult to deal with, he thoroughly enjoyed the time he spent with him. The night before the fight, Gomez and Zayas shared one last meal before the long-awaited weigh-in the next morning. Zayas explains the story and he says, "When he finished eating that night, Wilfredo looked over and said, 'Bobby, I'm going to tell you something,' to which I responded, 'What are you going to tell me?' Then Wilfredo said, "With what you gave me to eat tonight, I'm going to be 3 or 4 pounds overweight, more than I was this morning." I told him, "Okay, we will go first thing in the morning to the scale, and if you did not lose at least 1 pound, then look for someone else." Zayas continued and he said, "The next morning, when we went to the scale, I stood in the back. Wilfredo went on the scale, looked at it, and yelled to me, 'Bobby, I lost 1.5 pounds. I figured that would happen. Then came the fight. No one could have predicted what was about to happen as both men walked down the aisle. This was only the setup for the great Hearns and Benitez matchup. Harold Lederman was one of the 3 judges that scored the fight, and he said, "I really didn't have any expectations." He was the current reigning 118-pound champ, and Gomez was the current reigning 122-pound champ. They were the best in the world at their weight class. When you have 2 reigning champions, you know it is going to be a very good fight. Then again, it was also the semi-final. The contrasts were evident as each man entered the ring. A loose Gomez bounced, while the stoic Pintor stayed put in his corner. Both of them were preparing to prove themselves at the next weight class, as Pintor shifted from 118 to 122, and Gomez was fighting his final bout at 122 and looking to greener pastures as a featherweight. There was so much to prove. As soon as the bell sounded, Gomez came out aggressively and struck first with an overhand right that momentarily wobbled Pintor at 1 minute and 17 seconds of the round. Sharp with his punches and showing an awareness of how to capitalise on every Pintor miscue, Gomez found his comfort zone early. Despite entering the fight as the favourite, Gomez understood that Pintor wasn't the type of opponent whom he could punish as effortlessly as he did against Pintor's countryman, Carlos Zarate. Yet, the super bantamweight champ still forged ahead with the same intensity, as he deftly mixed in a sharp pinpoint jab to open up for his right hand and then employed a pawing jab to measure Pintor. As soon as Pintor landed 3 jabs to open the second round, Gomez returned with a left-right combination that forced him to retreat again. Pintor utilised effective head movement, which made him a difficult target. However, it wouldn't take long for Gomez to get inside. Gomez landed a right cross with 30 seconds left in the round, a punch which had easily won him the first 2 rounds. The Ring magazine named the 3rd round the round of the year, and with good reason. Gomez intensified his attack from the opening bell. Likewise, Pintor braced himself for a torrent of activity. Utilising a classic defensive style, Pintor kept a consistent defensive guard throughout. With his hands held high, Pintor hoped to deflect any jabs with the palm of his right hand and any hooks with the exterior of either glove. The style didn't hinder Gomez from scoring effectively over the first 3 rounds. In fact, Gomez had a relatively easy time working his way inside. Then came a vicious onslaught as Gomez battered Pintor over the first 30 seconds of the historic 3rd round. Having thrown nearly 40 punches compared to a paltry return rate by Pintor, Gomez landed several punches that would have knocked out a lesser opponent. A straight right demanded Pintor's attention. Remarkably, Pintor didn't buckle or give in to the battering. He kept his composure, feinted, threw some counter hooks, and bided his time. Gomez said, "I thought he was going to go down early and by knockout, but he was well prepared. He had tremendous intensity and fighting condition." Although many punches were glancing blows, which ricocheted off Pintor's gloves, Gomez initiated the barrage with jabs and closed it out with his most vicious offering, a straight right that jarred Pintor's head back with the force of a bobblehead. The fighters were setting an impossibly fast pace to maintain. Eventually, Pintor escaped the dangerous confrontation without any significant damage, but was quickly pushed against the ropes again. This time Gomez went to the body and relied on uppercuts. By the midway point of the round, Gomez had punched himself out, and Pintor assumed the role of the aggressor. After Gomez missed a straight right, Pintor capitalised with the first of many left hooks that shook the champion. What separated the earlier Pintor and this version was that he was now throwing the uppercut off the hook, and it gave Gomez no time to regroup. Now Pintor forced Gomez across the ring and landed combinations that left him momentarily stunned, but not fully hurt. Gomez absorbed another dangerous left uppercut, maybe the best punch of the fight, before stumbling back to his corner as the fire he showed earlier was all but extinguished by Pintor's comeback. Noticing the turnabout, Gomez's handlers moved swiftly. Zayas said this was a very important fight for Wilfredo. He needed to win it badly. Let me tell you this, the fight was really close all the time. I was worried that he would lose strength. The fight was already in the 7th or 8th round, and I went to tell his handlers, just move around. Don't let him throw too many punches so we can get his energy back by the final round. Then he came back and knocked him out near the end of the fight. Few expected Lupe Pintor to come out as sluggish as he did over the first 2 rounds. In that third, the more aggressive and revitalised Mexican challenger showed his resilience as he slowly changed the tide of the fight. In fact, Wilfredo Gomez backpedaled for most of the 4th round and Pintor worked off a jab to win the round by landing the sharper punches. At best, Gomez appeared weary and exhausted. The ebb and flow continued in the 6th as Gomez gave up the first part of the round but regained some strength by the end. Still, in a difficult round for any judge to score, it was Pintor who landed the most lethal offering. Pressured and still winded in the 6th, Gomez returned to form at times in the 7th, but he had been jostled out of his comfort zone. Despite the violent exchanges, neither fighter was in danger of succumbing to a serious cut. Pintor didn't have a blemish on his face, while Gomez coped with a cut in his mouth and a well under his right eye. Fending off an effective Pintor over the first 30 seconds of the 8th round, Gomez landed straight rights, but they didn't have a lasting effect. Gomez clearly felt a sense of urgency as he cornered Pintor and landed punches. But as Gomez walked back to his corner in the 8th, he no longer had that cocksure look about him. Pintor had stolen something from him, and he had 7 rounds to get it back. In the midst of battle, a boxer needs to make decisions that impact the rest of his career, or in some scenarios, the rest of his life. If one needed a reason to continue loving the sport, Gomez supplied it in the second half of the 9th round when he decided that he would not and could not lose to Pintor. Pintor landed a left hook to the body with malice to start the 9th, and the jabs seemed to carry just a bit more weight as each one stopped Gomez in his tracks. How was Gomez supposed to beat a man who seemingly didn't react to his best punches? After taking a damaging right hand that left him shattered and appearing more fragile, Gomez found the strength to piece together a rally that spirited him through the last 2.5 minutes of the round. Recognising that Pintor showed an unusual affinity for staying on the ropes, Gomez nudged him back to the ropes and jammed him with a short right hand and hooks and even a stray elbow threw in there. In familiar territory, Pintor bobbed and weaved, supplemented by the give and take of the ropes. But each feint only left him open for another right hand, and each time he rose out of his crouch, Gomez punched through his guard. Pintor fans must have wondered why he was giving away a round he had worked so hard to control. The answer was that he didn't have a choice. Gomez said, "In the 9th round, I got control of the fight." Few fighters had the ability to transform so quickly in a bout as Gomez did. At one moment he looked like he was in a slumber, barely surviving, and the next he was refreshed and determined. What was happening to Pintor as he bounced off the ropes wasn't an act of a desperate man. It was pure vintage Wilfredo Gomez, back, again, sneering at Pintor in the 10th. Gomez reverted back to the jab, which provided a reprieve from the frequent infighting of the previous round. Along with benefiting from a 30-second break in the action due to a taping issue, Gomez evoked glimpses of himself from earlier rounds as he tripled up on his hooks to the head. Back in charge at the outset of the 11th round, Gomez had regained his confidence and fought with resolve. The fighters jousted early, and then Gomez used hooks to the body and lunging right hands to position Pintor in the corner. However, Pintor counterpunched effectively, and for every 3-punch combination by Gomez, Pintor stuck a hard jab or right hand in his face to halt the attack and move the action back to the middle of the ring. Pintor took the lead for nearly a minute in the middle of the round as he stymied Gomez with a sharp lead right against the ropes. The fighters were so thoroughly engaged that it was hard to see how much impact his punches had on the Puerto Rican champ. Don Chagrin, who was there at ringside, said after he started to go to the body, it was too late. He waited too long to go there. Heading into the 12th round, Gomez coped with severely swollen eyes. Partially blinded but not finished, Gomez worked off a rhythm. At that point his eyes appeared as mere slits, but somehow they didn't impede his focus. It would be impossible to convey the level of brutality that both men experienced in that 12th round. Gomez revealed why he is considered an all-time great, as he followed a pattern of 3-4 punch combinations with an instinctive step-back move to avoid any return punches, and then cut off the ring so Pintor couldn't escape. Pintor's only recourse was to bury his head and try to force his way out of the torment. For nearly 30 punches, with several landing cleanly, Gomez hurt Pintor and almost incurred a stoppage by referee Arthur Mercante Sr. Miraculously, Pintor returned fire and doused the incoming Gomez with his own brand of left hooks and right counters. Toward the end of the round, a head-first Gomez bullied Pintor back into the corner. It didn't matter. The end of the round belonged to Pintor. The fury of Gomez, offset by Pintor's resilience, provided a micronism of the entire fight to that point. How Pintor withstood the first minute of the round will go down in boxing lore. Pintor looked the fresher of the two fighters in the 13th round and caught Gomez retreating helplessly with left and right combinations. If anything, the round highlighted the level of punishment that Gomez received in the previous round, as well as Pintor's excellent recuperative skills. Going into the 14th round, both men were physically and mentally fading. In the end, Gomez was too much for Pintor to handle. What started out as a typical round with each man jabbing ended dramatically, with Pintor collapsing to the canvas. The first of two knockdowns came when Gomez threw a right hand that missed Pintor and forced him to an unbalanced crouching position. Still exhausted, Gomez somehow found the strength to react quickly. Before Pintor could react, Gomez's left hook sent him sprawling on the canvas. Pintor patiently waited until the last second before he rose to beat Mercante's count at 9. Harold Lederman, the judge at ringside, said the crowd was roaring in that last round. I had my doubts that he would get up, but he did. Mercante didn't stop it right away because it was such a great fight. But the punishment didn't end there. Gomez charged Pintor and then backed him up against the ropes again. Initially, Gomez missed 3 punches, but a short left hook to the body ignited the stoppage. His last hook nearly decapitated Pintor. Pintor landed on one knee and Mercante immediately jumped in. Pintor gave his cornerman a look that revealed a mixture of sorrow and acceptance that said, "Now, please help me." As quickly as he shot that look, Pintor had crumpled to his back and was being tended to. In the opposite corner, Gomez had been hoisted onto his cornerman's shoulders, but he was hustled back to the canvas to receive medical attention. This fight represented the best the sport had to offer. The fight was stopped at 2 minutes and 44 seconds of the 14th round, and at the time, 2 of the 3 judges had Gomez winning. Dick Cole had it 126 to 120, Harold Lederman 125 to 121, and Artie Adala 123 to 124. Gauging the level of mental anguish that a fighter feels in a boxing match is nearly impossible. Gomez's bout with Pintor signalled a rare occurrence in the sport. Often, the blood and guts brawls that fans clamour for involve 2 good fighters or 2 lesser fighters who have yet to make a name for themselves. They rarely involve 2 great fighters. By the 12th round, both men's energy levels had dissipated to the point that they forged ahead solely on desire and will to win. At times, they engaged in equal give and take, while at others, Gomez broke down Pintor with 20 to 30 punch combinations, a handful of them clean offerings. Pintor fans were left in disbelief at his courage and resilience. Even Pryor versus Arguello in the same year could not match the consistent violence that was revealed in each round of this fight. Years later, Gomez still remembers the historic ending. He said, "In that 14th round, I defeated him with a KO. A left hook punch to his liver with a right punch to his jaw, not being able to recover. Yes, this fight was key as to prove all my fighting skills and my will to be one of the great champions of all times." In between, Pintor also landed sharp and clean punches that won him rounds, as his versatility and ability to move from the lead role to the counterpuncher proved admirable. In the end, only one question needed to be asked. What goes through a man's head over 14 rounds of torment? Only Gomez and Pintor can answer that question. That being said, Gomez was never great again. Gomez said, "First the boxing match was to be held in Las Vegas, then it was changed to New Orleans, and the main attraction was the fight between Tommy Hearns and Wilfredo Benitez. But the real main attraction was my fight versus Guadalupe Pintor. My fight was recognised as the fight of the century. Once I win, everybody that turned their back on me were just backed at my corner like nothing at all had ever happened. Some people are so superficial and only want to be in the spotlight no matter what. To this day, boxing fans and pundits alike, they wax lyrical over this fight. This fight was supposed to be a warm-up for the tactical battle that never materialised between Tommy Hearns and Wilfred Benitez. That bout paled in comparison, but it did not have much of a chance from the beginning. It was faced with a hurdle of trying to overshadow a matchup that reeked of greatness, and in a rare occurrence, reach such heights. Gomez recalled, he said, "During the fight, I could see at plain sight that he was hurt, tired, and in his eyes I could see he was very weak. And then I knew I could finish him and go in for the kill and win the fight. When I retained my belt, I felt great, on top of the world and vindicated. I showed everybody that I was still the best of the best." When asked about his legacy and if he needed Pintor to validate him as a great champion, Gomez definitively said, "No, I just had to validate who I still was. I knew who I was and that I had lots of great boxing skills and technique and that fire within me that never ever left my soul and body. This is what I was born to do and what I loved executing. I breathe and I live for boxing. My winning established that I was always a champion, and I wanted to show all my detractors who I still was and why I was considered one of the best boxers of all time." Those close to Gomez recognised the transformation he had made since the Sanchez fight and accepted that this version was good enough for them. Those who continued to revert back to the loss to Salvador Sanchez were ignoring the reality of Gomez's transformation. Despite how poorly Gomez had fought against Sanchez, he was able to prove that it was merely an aberration. In his mind, Gomez did not believe that the fight revealed much, if anything, about his capabilities. He said, "As a boxer, I never ever doubted myself. I was confident with my boxing skills, but some people just jump to conclusions without trying to get all the facts. For these few, let's say, it was a good night for Sanchez and a bad night for me. Let's say that without being too clinical. It was just plain and simple luck." As a fighter, Gomez still had a lot left. More importantly, he discovered a gem in Munoz Zayas, who was instrumental in changing the mindset and the mood of the training camp. Not an emotionally charged guy, Zayas led by example and used his expertise as a tool to draw Gomez's focus back solely on the fight. Zayas said, "After the fight, Wilfredo was very emotional. He was happy about everything. He was a little frustrated because there was a party that Don King was having for Wilfredo, and I said, I was sorry, but I had to go back and take a plane back to Puerto Rico that night. A couple of days later in Puerto Rico, he called me and said, 'Bobby, I have something for you.' It was a cheque that he had for me for my job. He paid me nicely." When asked about this, Gomez replied by saying, "I don't remember Zayas ever taking a penny." Outside the ring, Gomez was recently divorced from his wife Gina and was looking to find a balance between his work and social responsibilities. Brilliantly summing up his position in the sport, Gomez said, "I didn't have an option to lose in that fight. I was not as strong as I could have been. Pintor lasted at least 3 or 4 rounds more because I felt weak. I would have definitely finished him earlier." Pintor and Gomez may have been billed as the appetizer to the headliner, but there was nothing that could have been further from the truth. Reaching that zenith again would have been nearly impossible, even if Hearns and Benitez had not been a virtual dud of a matchup. Harold Lederman said it was a semi-final and the people couldn't even cheer for Hearns and Benitez because it wasn't half the fight that this was. I take nothing away from Tommy, and Wilfred was a great fighter, but it wasn't Gomez Pintor, and after that the people had nothing left. I tell people it's the greatest fight I ever saw. There was an ebb and flow, and those guys were throwing bombs. Pintor would just shake them off and go back and beat up Wilfredo. By the 14th round, I was saying there's not going to be a knockout because no one is going down. I thought it would go the distance. Then, Pintor went down." As Gomez walked out of the arena, for the first time since the loss to Sanchez, he was no longer burdened by that loss. Now he had momentum and could feed off that momentum as he looked to the 126-pound weight division. The lawyer, Paco Vaccarel, said it was a remarkable fight. He came back and fought a great fight. It made people forget about Salvador Sanchez. He was an idol for Puerto Rico. What was lost in the brilliance of the fight was the defence itself. The victory represented the last of Gomez's 17 title defences, all by knockout. Not only had he adopted a division that was built for him, but he moulded it in his image. Whenever anyone thought of the super bantamweight division, it would be Gomez's face they saw. It was difficult to measure how important that was to him. Carlos Nevarez, a Puerto Rican boxing journalist, said that was the fight where he regained his confidence again. After he was beaten by Sanchez, Wilfredo was beating guys like Robert Rulbaldino. Good, but not great fighters. Those guys literally made that fight the best of the night. It was that fight that redeemed him to show he was still the best fighter around. After that fight, Gomez took 2 easy bouts in Puerto Rico with Ivan Samuco and Eladio Santana. First, Gomez knocked out Samuco in 3 rounds in Ponce on the 23rd of April, then he disposed of Santana in 2 rounds that December. However, in between those clashes, Gomez made the news by knocking down his former friend, Angel Olivares, the sports editor of the Puerto Rican daily newspaper, El Reportero. Olivares had a reputation for being brutally honest and caustic when it came to the handling of the local sports stars. However, Gomez had taken umbrage at a conversation that Olivares had with Yamil Chide and confronted the writer. Olivares and Gomez later became friends again. While Olivares recalled that the confrontation ignited when some of his colleagues told Gomez lies about negative things he had said and written, Gomez recalled a different version of events. He said, "He came over to interview me and forcefully stuck the recorder in my face to get a quote. That's when I pushed him. After the incident faded into the past, both men moved on. I forgave him," said Olivares. "We went to court, but I decided not to press charges. He didn't have any reason to hit me, but he did. After the incident, I saw him in a dining room, and I said, 'Hey, how are you?' And he said, 'I want to tell you something. I respect you as a man.' It was over from that point on. He didn't have to say that." When 2 Puerto Rican fighters meet in the ring, it's not just a fight, it's an event. When 2 very good fighters meet, it's a spectacle. WBC champion Wilfredo Gomez had faced Puerto Rican fighters before, but none of them was quite like Juan Laporte, a paradoxical fighter who could either be underwhelming or brilliant. As Gomez continued to move up in weight, he recognised the disparity in talent between the featherweights and junior featherweights. At 126 pounds, Gomez had Azuma Nelson, Eusebio Pedrosa, Laporte and Rocky Lockridge to attend to. Still, Gomez, as confident as he was, occasionally confided in others regarding his future. Gomez's friend and lawyer Paco Alcarel said, "I was convinced that Wilfredo was distrustful by nature, and I've never changed his mind. He once asked me, in a New York hotel before Laporte, if I thought he should start thinking about retirement, because in those days, an excellent champion, like Jeff Chandler from Philadelphia, had suffered retinal detachment in both eyes and wouldn't fight anymore. When I said yes by the amount of punches that he was receiving lately, he told me he would do in the near future. Well, he stayed 5 more years in the ring with 3 wins and 2 losses and consequent problems with his vocal cords that doesn't allow him to speak clearly." However, when the opponent was countryman Wilfredo Gomez, Juan Laporte had no choice but to be fastidious in his approach. There was no room for error. By the time the fighters met on the 31st of March 1984, Laporte, 24-4, had made 2 defences of his featherweight title. His most recent highlight had been a 12-round unanimous decision over Ruben Castillo in February of 1983. But he also lost a 10-round non-title decision to the less heralded Gerald Hayes. At his best, Laporte was a riveting fighter who put his punches together well, went to the body effectively, and could box as well as slug. Conversely, Laporte could also be unmotivated and unimpressive. Although the fight took time to come to fruition, Gomez studied his opponent intently. When Laporte fought the undefeated Johnny De La Rosa on the 25th of June 1983, Gomez wasn't impressed. He said, "I think he beat De La Rosa by 1 or 2 points, but I don't think he's in any shape to beat me by decision or knockout." Fortunately for Juan Laporte, he wasn't meeting a 24-year-old version of Gomez. Laporte was set to earn $500,000, while Gomez's purse was $250,000. Gomez was a 2-1 betting favourite. Paco Valcarel said Laporte wanted that fight. He thought he could beat Wilfredo. They were sure of it. They made a $5,000 bet on the fight with Juan Laporte's brother. What sparked a major controversy was the scrupulous actions of a certain Don King, Carlos Espada, David Robles and Yamil Chade months before the bout was even signed. On September 1st, 1983, Dick Young, a journalist for The Hour, reported that Laporte, then 23, was bullied into signing a contract to fight Gomez, or he would have lost the opportunity altogether. According to the article, someone in the car threatened that Gomez would fight Hector Camacho instead, and Laporte would be pushed aside if he didn't sign the contract immediately. Laporte was allotted no time to consider any offers because of the context of the conversation. As the seedy transaction took place, King ordered his chauffeur to head directly to the airport. The problem was that Laporte felt a sense of loyalty to Espada, whom he described as a father figure. Factored into the heightened tension was the understanding that Espada had sold his share of Laporte's contract to King. With Chade forcing the issue and guaranteeing him $75,000 to fight Gomez, Laporte eventually capitulated and signed the contract despite the fact that his manager, Howie Albert, was not present during the impromptu meeting. Laporte, who hailed from Guayama, Puerto Rico, knew the ramifications of what he was doing, but he also felt trapped and defenceless in the presence of some of boxing's most powerful figures. It was a typical power play by Don King, a mastermind when it came to taking advantage of fighters. His plan was to take the signed contract with Laporte's signature to Gomez. An enraged Albert later responded by saying, "Somebody has got to take a goddamn stand against these guys." Ironically, the same newspaper reported a day earlier that according to Albert, Laporte signed the contract under duress and would not be fighting Gomez, as was earlier reported. By the 22nd of December, the fight was officially announced by promoter Robert Andrioli. According to early figures, Gomez would earn $525,000, while Laporte would take in $175,000. Those figures changed considerably by fight time. In early March, Laporte refused to minimise Gomez's warrior mentality when he told a reporter, "You can tell when a guy is tough, and he's tough." Laporte did not appear too anxious to get in the ring when he also told a reporter, "I just want to get this over with, to see what comes up next." Throughout the promotions, Laporte, who grew up in Puerto Rico but spent the bulk of his life in New York, promised a knockout. Gomez also asserted his dominance as the veteran fighter. He said, "I wanted to show him who I was as a fighter. I wanted to give him a course in boxing. I was well prepared for this fight." More importantly, the old brash Gomez had finally returned. Prior to the fight, Gomez told a Puerto Rican reporter that he would dedicate the fight to my ego, and that he would thoroughly enjoy the victory himself. Despite his brutal honesty regarding whom he was fighting for, Gomez did not engage Laporte in any bitter pre-fight confrontations. If Laporte planned to etch his own path as the next Puerto Rican legend, he first had to douse Gomez's flame, which had begun to flicker again. Confident that he could dictate the pace of the fight, Gomez said, "Laporte is dangerous in the first 5 rounds because he is young and strong, but he is a boxer that keeps coming forward, and those boxers who fight like that are dead men against Wilfredo Gomez." Furthermore, Gomez gained significant motivation from the loss to Sanchez. This, his second try at the featherweight title, with his real chance for redemption. The fight would be held at the Roberto Clemente Coliseum and shown on closed circuit in Las Vegas, Chicago and New York. To add intrigue to this Puerto Rican duel, Gomez had to come down from 143 pounds to make weight. He also had to deal with Espada's antics as Laporte's co-trainer. Believing in sorcery, Espada said, "If I were to put a spell on Gomez, he'd believe it. When he looks at Laporte, he'll see Sanchez." Gomez replied before the fight, "I am a Scorpio. The poison is in my punches." So the stage was set. The storyline was crystal clear. Having accomplished everything he set out to do at 122 pounds, Gomez had vacated his title after that career-defining performance against Lupe Pintor. Since then, Gomez had only fought tune-ups. So a victory over a strong young fighter like Juan Laporte could seal his fate as a world champion in 2 weight classes. Now that brings us to the end of part 3 of the Wilfredo Bazooka Gomez career profile. Now we have got one more part left to go, covering the Juan Laporte fight and the rest of Wilfredo's career. Now if you've enjoyed the episode, please do let me know. You can let me know on Career Profiles Podcast Twitter page. You can let me know on Spotify, on Apple. You can leave ratings and reviews. Please continue to keep doing it. If you have been watching on YouTube, please make sure you leave a comment below about your thoughts and feelings on the episode. As always, I've really enjoyed putting this together. Some great articles out there. A couple of great books that have been used for this episode and for the whole career profile on Wilfredo. So I will make sure that credit is given to those at the end of part number 4. But for now, that brings an end to part number 3. As always, thank you so much for listening. We will be back shortly with part 4. And that is the end of part 3 of the Wilfredo Bazooka Gomez career profile on the BTR Boxing Podcast Network.